The U.S. Census Bureau says that nearly 47 million Americans live below the poverty line these days. Other statistics show us that 16 million of them are children. The formula for determining what the poverty line in this country is was actually a formula developed in 1960. And using that formula, the United States government determined that for a household of four, the poverty level for a family of four, the poverty line for that family is a family annual income of $24,000 a year. According to the National Center for Children in Poverty, about 21% of all the kids in this country live under that line, live in a family that makes under $24,000 a year. However, the National Center for Children in Poverty did some research, and it shows with average household expenses and the inflation adjustments and cost of living adjustments over time, a family of four really should be taking in over $48,000 a year to be out of poverty. 44% of all children in this country live under that line. But did you know, and this is shocking, that there are 1.5 million households in the United States that live on less than $2 a day? They call that the ultra-poor line. 1.5 million households. That's double the number today than were in 1996. Households in America living under $2 a day. The Census Bureau released statements saying that 47.6% of single-parent households in this country live in poverty. Did you know that nearly half of all the food stamp recipients in this country are children? In 2007, it was 12 out of every 100 children were on food stamps. Now, it's 20 out of every 100 children. Over half of our public school kids in this country qualify for subsidized lunches. And I guess then what I find the hardest about all of this is that kids that grow up in these kind of circumstances, they just aren't even given a chance. They don't even have a fighting chance to improve their lives if they wanted to. A lot of these kids don't know what it would even look like or what it would take. And what happens is poverty then becomes generational poverty, meaning that it gets passed down from generation to generation. In the county I lived in Ohio, that's exactly what has happened. They said like a third of the county is in generational poverty, going back at least 3 generations. They said there were some families in our county that the poverty they lived under went back 8 generations. So it begins to feel just utterly hopeless for these kids as they grow up. They don't know a way of life any different than the one they're living. And when that hopelessness sets in, then despair sets in, and then people turn to all sorts of means just to escape. In downtown Ashtabula, the nursing home down there that had been there for years closed because a meth lab that had been built in the back of it exploded. In a nursing home in the downtown area. I remember when I was a chaplain in the Richmond City Jail, and I'd meet some of the guys who were locked up in there and got to talk with them. Many of them were facing crimes, very serious crimes, and were waiting trial. Some of these guys they were brilliant, really smart, really interesting people. And I'd ask them then, how did you end up in this situation? And you know what they'd tell me? They'd tell me that there wasn't any other option. This was the life they knew, the life they were born into. It was all they knew. Some of them had never left the neighborhoods that they grew up in, let alone the city of Richmond. They couldn't even imagine what another life looked like. Words like opportunity or making something out of themselves, they were just that. They were just words. When I'd ask them about their families, there were basically 3 stories. They either had parents who were never around because they were working 2 or 3 jobs each just to make ends meet. Even though they knew that their parents really cared and really loved them, they just couldn't be there for their kids, even if they really wanted to be. Or their parents were doing exactly the same things they were doing that landed them in jail. Or the parents just didn't even care. They had no interest, no hope, no faith in their child. These kids just didn't have a chance. Most of them had never even really seen a doctor, let alone had dreams of becoming a doctor. I have a friend back home, back in Ohio, and we were talking the other day about a patient he had. A young man, 15 years old, comes in with his mother, and he tests positive for gonorrhea and chlamydia. He had previously been diagnosed with herpes. 15 years old. Dad's not in the picture. I asked her, what did this mother do, trying to imagine what my own mother's response would be if I had a doctor's appointment like that. She told me the mom just didn't even seem to care. Didn't even faze her. Now, what chance does a kid like that have if his own mother doesn't care that by the age of 15, he'd been diagnosed with 3 STDs? How's this kid supposed to learn responsibility for his actions if no one's holding him responsible? How's this kid supposed to feel loved if no one is loving him? If his own mother cares so little for him, is it really any surprise then that this kid's acting out sexually? Now, it's tempting then to just push it back and blame it on poverty or simply say things like it's just bad parenting. But the honest truth is, these are problems that plague our community as well. A community where kids do have a fighting chance. The truth is, as a parent on the front lines of having a teenager, I can tell you how hard it is for our kids. Now, the pressures that they face in our communities are different than the pressures kids face in poverty-stricken communities. But there's still pressures and influences beyond our control and beyond our liking as parents. And even though we may try our absolute best as parents, some of the things our kids face are just completely out of our power, and our children will have to make tough decisions on their own. And no matter how hard we try as parents, sometimes the decisions that our children will face and the decisions that they will make will be the wrong ones. They'll make bad decisions. But our ability then to love them through those bad choices, to practice grace with them, to teach them responsibility for those bad choices, to be invested in the lives of our children, can make all the difference in the world. That doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. We have to show our kids that we care. We have to show them that they're loved. We have to be Jesus to our own children. But the thing is it takes more than just parents caring about a kid to make that kid successful. And what about the kids who have parents that don't care? And I think that's where a church community is really important. If Jesus says, let the children come, then we need to be on the front lines of creating a place in a community where kids will come. We should be creating a community where kids are loved and cherished and given self-worth and shown that they matter. And you see, that takes a church-wide effort. We have to invest in our children. We have to make it a church-wide ministry. I'll give you a few very personal examples about what a difference a church can make in the life of a kid. Now, most of you by now know that I'm a recovering alcoholic. But what you might not know is that my first trip to rehab and recovery happened when I was 15. I grew up in an upper middle class community like this one. My dad made good money. My mom didn't work, she stayed at home, and my parents were invested in my life, perhaps more invested than I would have liked them to be. They took me to church every Sunday, and I was involved and engaged in the life of that church. And yet I still made bad decisions. I made really bad decisions. I had every opportunity afforded to me. I had a fighting chance to make something out of my life. And I still made awful choices. So here I am, I'm 15, I can't stop drinking and doing drugs. And I'm going through the confirmation class at my church. The church, they assign session members to you as confirmation mentors. And so one night I'm meeting with my confirmation mentor, and for some reason, I don't remember what the circumstances were, but I broke down crying and ended up telling this lady just everything, just spilling my guts to her. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell my parents. She just listened and loved me. Throughout the next few weeks, we met at her house at least once a week, and we would meet and talk, and she started investigating rehab programs for children, and I didn't know she was doing that. And then one night, maybe about a month into this, she convinces me that maybe there's something we can do about it. We get my dad, we go for a walk, and I end up spilling my guts to my dad. And my dad, when he gets angry, he gets this blood vessel on the top of his forehead that begins to pop out. That night he had like 20 of them, I swear. But right after that, I started in rehab. Because this lady from my church was Jesus for me. Because she gave me a safe place and was a safe person. She was a non-anxious, non-judgmental person who gave me the courage to do what I needed to do. And the rest of the church, as they were finding out about this, loved me through it. People were supportive. People showed me and my family care and love. People at that church were Jesus to me. And that church saved my life through their love for me, for at least letting this child come, no matter what condition I was in. Now, not many of you here know my oldest daughter, Samantha. She doesn't come to church that often. She used to love going to church. She doesn't anymore. That's not your fault. That happened at our last church. Every Sunday she'd come to church, she'd hear some ladies in the church gathering making comments about what she was wearing, constantly about the clothes and the way she looked. Which is wild to me because my daughter Samantha is a very modest and shy girl who hates the thought of having her skin exposed. We never let her leave the house dressed inappropriately, but partly because she never wanted to leave the house dressed inappropriately. But these women would criticize her just the same, and just in enough earshot for her and her mother to hear it, over and over again. And so the church then has become a painful place for my daughter. And I don't blame her. Things like that, especially when a girl is in her preteen to teenage years, are extremely sensitive and extremely painful. Now she comes every once in a while, but I can tell that it's hard for her and it's uncomfortable for her. She's been burned by church people. She doesn't trust them anymore. I've been to churches where parents have been there and their kids start making noise during worship and somebody turns around and gives them the evil eye. And they pick up their kids and walk out and never come back. Is that really letting the children come? Sometimes we quickly forget what it's like to have young children or kids of our own. The truth is that children's ministry and youth ministry is a church-wide ministry. It takes the investment and support of the whole church to do it well. And it's a vitally important ministry of any church, but especially this church. When we came here visiting this church, when we were thinking about coming here, I was blown away by the youth rooms in this building. The church I grew up in, the one that loved me, had stinky old second and third-hand couches shoved in a basement room that was right next to the boiler room. Our youth room looks like the Ritz-Carlton in comparison to that. We care. We care about our children here. And while I've been working with our youth team, I can tell you that we have people who are dedicated and committed to working with and loving our kids. People who give of themselves tirelessly to create a community where Jesus' voice of "let the children come" is heard. But it isn't just up to them. It can't be just up to them. It takes all of us. Just like I told the kids up here last week at the baptism, these kids are part of our family now. And we've promised both to their parents and to God to care for them and help raise them. But that calling then to care for these kids, to care for children, can't just stop at these doors. Because there are so many kids right now, even in our own community, who are lost, who are struggling to find a better way, or really any way of living this life. What if we really took Jesus seriously when he said, "Let the children come"? What if we began to treat every kid we met as though they were our own precious child? What if we decided to fight for the kids that no one else seems to be fighting for? How many lives do you think that would save? Don't you think the investment would be worth it? What would happen if we really made a church-wide effort, really made an effort, to put children in youth ministry at the forefront of what we do as a church? I'll be honest, I don't really know what would happen. But I bet you it'd be incredible. I bet you it'd be transformative. And I bet you it'd make Jesus pretty proud. Amen.